I'm wearing the perfect shirt for this. Today we're going to be talking about the Milgram experiment. For those of you who don't know, it was more or less a psychological experiment that was testing the obedience of people to just people in authority. So to contrast that, I decided I'd do a little bit of a punk look. So we're gonna get right into that. Cheers. This was one of the most famous studies of pretty much just blind obedience in psychology, and it was carried out by this man named Stanley Milgram. He was a psychologist at Yale University. He conducted an experiment that focused on the conflict between obedience to authority and personal conscience. Hold on, let me get a little lower. Yes, much better. Oh, my curtain. Could you not? Milgram examined justifications for the acts of genocide offered by those accused at the World War II Nuremberg war criminal trials, the Nazis. Their defense was often based on obedience, that they were just following orders from their superiors. So, he was curious how legitimate those claims were. It began in July 1961, a year after the trial of Adolf Eichmann in Jerusalem. Milgram devised the experiment to answer the question, could it be that Eichmann and his million accomplices in the Holocaust were just following orders? Could we call them all accomplices? So he wanted to investigate whether the Germans were particularly obedient to authority figures, as this was common explanation for the Nazi killings in World War II. Come on out. I'm going to have to get more of this soon. Woo. Lord, I haven't used this much foundation in a long time. Milgram selected participants for his experiment by newspaper, advertising for male participants to take part in a study of learning at Yale University, which made it sound even more prestigious to these people. Ooh, Yale's conducting a study? Ooh, they know what they're doing. So the procedure was that the participant was paired with another person, and they drew lots to find out who would be the learner and who would be the teacher. The draw was fixed so that the participant was always the teacher and the learner was one of Milgram's people. He had hired an actor to play that part. Alright. I kind of want to do something a little different. I kind of want to do like an all white makeup look. Like a white and black. I don't know. White, black, and green, I suppose. I want myself some little white freckles. I like that. I think I'm going to cover my eyebrows too. Just fuck them. Just get rid of them. So the learner, who they called Mr. Wallace, was taken into a room and had electrodes hooked up to him. And the teacher and researcher went into a room next door that contained an electric shock generator. That's kind of a look in and of itself too, though. In the room that had the electric shock generator, it had a row of switches marked from 15 volts, which was a slight shock, to 375 volts, danger, severe shock, to 450 volts, XXX, death. He wanted to see how far people would go in obeying an instruction if it involved harming another person. They were told they were investigating learning. There were 40 males between the ages of 20 and 50 whose jobs ranged from unskilled to professional from the New Haven area. They were paid $4.50 for just turning up. So at the beginning of the experiment, they introduced them to this actor, Mr. Wallace. They were to draw straws to determine which role they got. The 2 rooms in the Yale Interaction Laboratory were used, one for the learner and one for the teacher. The learner was strapped to a chair with electrodes. So the learner is supposed to learn a list of word pairs given to him to learn. The teacher tests him by naming a word and asking the learner to recall its partner from a list of 4 possible choices. The teacher is told to administer an electric shock every time the learner makes a mistake, increasing the level of shock each time. There were 30 switches on the shock generator marked from 15 volts, which was a slight shock, to 450, danger, severe shock, XXX. The learner gave mainly wrong answers on purpose, and for each of these, the teacher gave him an electric shock. When the teacher refused to administer a shock, the experimenter was to give a series of orders to ensure they continued. And those orders were, they had 4. So it was, number 1, please continue. Number 2, the experiment requires you to continue. Number 3, it is absolutely essential that you continue. Number 4, you have no other choice but to continue. Oh, would you look at that? I've got green liner. not crazy about the freckles with this. I'm going to omit them. All right. So the conclusion was that ordinary people are likely to follow orders given by an authority figure. Obedience to authority is ingrained in us all from the way we are brought up. People tend to obey orders from people if they recognize their authority as morally right and or legally based. This response to legitimate... Where's my basket? Oh. This response to legitimate authority is learned in a variety of situations. For example, in the family, school, and workplace. So Milgram summed up the article in Perils of Obedience. The legal and philosophic aspects of obedience are of enormous import, but they say very little. How did you get up? Come now. Yeah. The legal and philosophic aspects of obedience are of enormous import, but they say very little about how most people behave in concrete situations. I set up a simple experiment at Yale to test out how much pain an ordinary citizen would inflict on another person simply because he was ordered to by an experimental scientist. Stark authority was pitted against the subject's participants' strongest moral imperatives against hurting others, and with the subject's ears ringing with the screams of victims, authority won more often than not. The extreme willingness of adults to go to almost any lengths on the command of an authority constitutes the chief finding of the study, and the fact most urgently demanding explanation. Yeah, so I watched some of these experiments. I can't show you the clips here because I'm not that good at editing, but you should watch it. And you'll see that some of them start questioning it. They're like, because this guy, the actor, he's like, I have a heart condition, will it hurt me? And they're like, oh, no, it won't cause any harm. It might hurt, but it can't kill you. And so each time they increase the voltage, he'll like yell and scream, and he starts saying like, let me out of here, I don't want to continue. And so they kind of contest for a minute, and then he's like, nope, you have to keep going. And so they're like, you want me to keep going? Yep, keep going. well, okay, you're the scientist. It won't hurt them, I guess. So it's really sick. It's really interesting. Some of them did refuse straight up. They're like, no, take your money back, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, oh, well, you get to keep the money no matter what. So I know it's just interesting to see humans just blindly follow orders. Because that's, I mean, it is what we're taught to do from a young age. Like, oh, do what your parents say. Well, why? Just because, you know, whether it's right or wrong, that's what your parents told you to do, and it's time to do it. I think it is time for a black lip. Yeah, it's the same with, like, typically, you know, listening to teachers and church leaders. Most people are not taught to immediately question. Those authority figures. That's pretty cool. But yeah, we're not really taught to question those authority figures. We're supposed to just blindly trust them always because they know what they're talking about. And you're a kid, and not even kids, it's everybody. So he explained the behavior of his participants by suggesting that people have two states of behavior, which is So Milgram explained the behavior of his participants by suggesting that people have two states of behavior when they are in a social situation, which is the autonomous state. People direct their own actions and they take responsibility for the results of those actions. Number 2, the agentic state. People allow others to direct their actions and then pass off the responsibility for the consequences to the person giving the orders. In other words, they act as agents for another person's will. Which, that's another thing I saw when watching these, is a lot of them were like, if something happens to him, I don't want to take responsibility for that. And there was one guy that continued to shock him and was like, you're going to take full responsibility for this, right? You're going to take full responsibility. Yep, it's all on me. And they asked him afterwards, you know, they told him he was fine, told him it was an experiment, and said, is there anything that the learner could have said that would have made you stop? Because the thing is, he was screaming bloody murder. He was screaming, you know, I don't want to participate anymore. I'm done. I have a heart condition. I feel my blood pulse rising, like all these different things, and he just kept going. He was just like, well, I have to. I don't have a choice, and he doesn't have a choice, so it's just too bad, you know. And I don't know. He just kept reverting back to, well, I couldn't stop because he told me to keep going. He told me to keep going, so I had to keep going. And I think that's really interesting and kind of scary. Because I don't... Basically, he said everything that should have made this person say, no, I'm not pushing that button anymore. You can't not force my hand. And yet he continued. And every time he would ask the question, is there anything he could have said that would have made you stop? He just kept reverting to, he said I couldn't. And then he would ask again, well, is there anything he could have said that would have made you stop? And he just kept saying, well, I couldn't because he told me to keep going. Which I find very interesting, kind of fully trying to shift the blame. Because he realized he had said things that would have, should have, and would have made him stop. And yet he disregarded. I don't know. It's kind of sad to think that humans would hurt their fellow man just because they are told to, and just completely ignore their moral compass. I don't know. It's very strange and very interesting. And that's why I like hearing about these experiments. I don't know. These behavioral experiments really tend to uncover a dark truth about humanity and society, and it's, I don't know. Kids don't always just do what you're told just because you're told to do it. That is the lesson here today. Trust your own judgment. Because at the end of the day, anything you do truly falls back on you, despite what you've been taught and what you've been told. Oh man. At the end of the day, it's all your choice. What you do, and it falls back on you. You have to go to bed with yourself every night. Do you want to sleep with that person? Anyways. Fuck the man. Fuck the feds. Tiger King, goddamn. Hail Satan. Fuck you. Wake up, sheeple. Cheers.